Hey everybody, welcome to Tavern Talks. I am your wonderful tavern keeper for the evening. And once again, we come back with another guest. It's like they just don't want to leave me alone. It's okay though. It keeps my tavern busy. Um, some cool things I want to get everybody updated on before we start. If you look over to the left side, and I'm going to try to point the right way, there's some chat commands on there. So as we continue to grow this, we're going to start adding these commands, and they can be placed in Twitch. If you have any ideas of how you want to interact with the guest, or if you have any ideas of how we want to make this more exciting for everybody watching, please make sure that you pop over to the bar top and hop into our Discord and give us those updates, because that's what we're trying to do this year, is to make this more exciting for our audience, as well as maybe better for our guests to be able to interact with the audience, which is the main focus of this show. Um, Hopefully everybody can hear me and everything sounds good. I'm going to drop some music from our wonderful uh, people over there at Fantasy Plus from Monument Studios. That's our sponsor right now for Tavern Talks, so you can check them out. They've got a Kickstarter going. But that's not why we're here. We're here to talk about 50 years of fantasy. Now, for somebody who isn't 50, I will say for myself, it's at least 30 years of fantasy, because I've been reading since I swear I was a toddler. But
I've got 22 myself.
oh goodness, why am I getting two sets of sounds from you? Not good. Hold on. Why are we doing this to me? Where is my audio? No, it says what? Oh wait, I know why. No, that's not it either. Am I the only one hearing double? Because I heard double.
I heard double there for a second.
How? Okay.
I think it might have been because I had Twitch open as well.
Okay, but I have Twitch open, but my Twitch is muted. So where is this coming from? I'm losing my mind. Um, Give me a second, friends. I hope. Does everybody else hearing double, or is it just me? If it's just me, I will figure out how to deal with it myself.
Are you still hearing it?
I am still hearing it, yes. Like, it's coming from both my speakers and my headphones, and I don't know why, because Zoom is set strictly for headphones.
I just turn those speakers off.
Actually, that's not a horrible idea. Let me see if I just turn that down. Okay. As long as everybody else can hear the music, I don't need to hear it. So, yeah. Sorry, everybody. This has been an interesting way to start Twitch, to start our stream, because for some reason our stream has been acting up before we started, but we're ready to go now. So, Blake, kind of before we start diving into some questions, kind of give us a rundown. Like, what is 50 Years of Fantasy? Who are you? Like, what? How did all this become something?
Right. So 50 Years of Fantasy is a feature-length documentary.
Okay.
We plan on releasing late this fall. It covers not only the history of the game, because there's been several attempts to kind of consolidate and present the history of the game. We wanted to really highlight the community
Okay.
and the people that actually drive the game forward, because you see throughout playtesting, throughout the product cycles, that even Wizards of the Coast, they take that feedback from the community, and then they kind of use that to push the game forward. I've actually taken a look at the new player's handbook myself, and it's mirroring a lot of the suggestions that have come from players in groups and forums, and probably from question and answers at conventions and stuff like that. So there's that side of it, and then there's also the phenomena that we've kind of witnessed over the past 50 years, that this game is uniquely positioned to bring people together,
Absolutely.
and from all walks of life. Like, it doesn't matter where you're from, who you are, this game has a place for you. And that's just been like the most beautiful thing to see in action, especially as we've been traveling the country this year, visiting conventions, traveling out. We traveled out to Seattle Been up to like Geneva, Indianapolis, Columbus, Savannah, Georgia, all over the place. Yeah,
It's
and
like, where have you not been?
well, we haven't been to the UK yet, but that's actually on the schedule. So we've got one trip out there left to do before we wrap up production. But yeah, we've just seen a huge movement in the community over the past 50 years. Me myself, 22 years, um, of the game kind of gradually and especially in the past decade exponentially growing and bringing in people. And it's just been so beautiful to see that on a large scale. For something that I grew up, playing in high school and was kind of made fun of for.
Oh yeah, I mean, we weren't even allowed to talk about it in high school where I was at. It was more of a hush hush thing. Keep it on the down low. Don't let anybody know that you play.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I just wasn't even introduced to this until high school. So, but I'd been doing fantasy readings and like reading fantasy books since I was, a toddler. I feel like nowadays, but yeah, that's interesting because for somebody like yourself who is in a similar boat that I'm in, like, 20 some years of fantasy, but at the same time, you're speaking to some of these people who were at the beginning. They were at the 70s, early 80s motion of Dungeons and Dragons and the fantasy roleplay TTRPG style. I wouldn't say fantasy roleplay, but at least the tabletop version of it.
yeah, and it's very interesting how the game has evolved, even mechanically over
Mhm.
the years. It went from wargaming to a mix of wargaming and fantasy to storytelling being thrown into the mix, and then world building and all these different
Mhm.
components. And it's crazy to see something grow like that, or have the capability of growing like that. The modular nature of Dungeons and Dragons means you can slot just about any type of play that you can imagine into gameplay, and it fits right at home.
Mhm. No, I completely agree. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, Interesting enough, though, it seems to me though that it is definitely in this transition period. Once again, we're back to it's funny we talk about this because you see it all the time, and I haven't looked at my book yet. I have it in the other room. I might go grab it just to just be like, I have this now. We can, if we want to talk about things that they're showing that are actually community driven, which would be great to hear. I think Wizards got a lot of flack this year for 2024, and without fully diving into the book yet and understanding the changes that they're making, I don't want to speak on that yet because I feel like that is something that I'd be speaking on ill informed.
Right.
But I'm glad to hear at least some people stating that they took some of the things that people have been talking about in the community and wanting to be fixed and moving forward with those correction or changes. So,
Right. Well, for myself, I'm an old school gamer. I play mainly BX
okay.
via old school essentials over here, and so that's been kind of like my thing lately over the past like 3 or 4 years. And I got to speak to Gavin Norman, who put together Old School Essentials and ran such a successful Kickstarter for Dolmenwood. I've been absolutely blown away by his work. And so for me, it doesn't really affect me too much.
Right.
And I would assume for a fair amount of gamers, they're playing their own edition anyway. But that's the kind of like the beauty of it, right? Is that you really can kind of mix and match play styles. I've seen people at conventions who are like, oh, I only play 1E or I only play 2E or something like that. And then they sit down with a group of people and play 5E. And it's like it doesn't really matter as long as you're getting to play. And that's
Right.
kind of what I love about it is that it's you might have your preferred play style,
Yep.
but really like we all just want to live in a fantasy world.
Yeah, I mean escapism at its peak, right? Like that we a
Right.
lot of people are like, "Well, why do you do this stuff?" And why do we play games? And a lot of adults it's because we want to escape what we're dealing with in life or we want to feel something we're not feeling in our lives. Um,
It's interesting you bring up escapism because that's another thing that I've been talking about a lot. I actually talked to Alphinius Gu
Hmm.
about it, and that was such a great conversation.
Yeah.
He said, and I agree with him, that kind of whittling it down to escapism really isn't accurate. Like when you watch TV, that's escapism.
Hmm.
When you read books, that's escapism.
Right.
There's an extra element
Oh
to
yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons, and we've seen it in studies over the past couple of years that have been going on for quite a while now. We're seeing the results of these studies, and we're seeing that Dungeons and Dragons improves mental health. It is an extremely useful tool for education,
Mhm.
for various applications in multiple different markets and industries. There's no limit to it,
Oh
and
yeah.
it
No.
seems to
100%.
be like team building, right?
Hmm.
Like I've literally seen companies that use it for team building, and
Working on it right now. I'm trying to get my company to let me run a game for them, and they're like, "Oh, I don't know if it's a team building exercise." I'm like, "Oh, you just wait, bud."
there's
Like,
nothing there's nothing like it.
it's like you just wait.
Yeah. But yeah, so we've seen a whole lot of extremely useful applications come out of the game, and even if you whittle it down to its base form, you're still looking at your own character development.
Hmm.
If you play a character that maybe you go out on a limb and you play a character you're not used to playing. That they have a personality trait that you haven't really exhibited in your life, but you have to now, role play that
Hmm.
as part of the game. Like you get to experiment with the viewpoints of other people, and you kind of get to see other people as the humans they are,
Mm.
and realizing how many facets of personality and of behavior of the ways that we think exist. And it's really cool to experiment with that and really kind of see how deep that rabbit hole
Oh yeah,
goes.
definitely. Um, I, Shadow Lantern's is a very long time follower. He just stated his sister is in the medical residency, and they're even looking at team building with D&D. We're talking high level, highly educated people that are outside of the normal from what we consider normal D&D players. Though at this point, there
Right.
is no such thing as a normal D&D player anymore.
No,
Um,
no.
I mean, if you've been to any convention nowadays, the the stereotype is gone. Like everyone will be there. It's not a you can't pick somebody. You can't pick a specific type of person or a type of way they're shaped and things. It just doesn't work like that anymore.
Right.
Um, and not only that, and this is something I like to talk about, and I'm curious your thoughts on it. So over the last, let's say, 5, 10 years, not only have we seen a huge influx in D&D, we've seen a huge influx in people coming out who are A-list celebrities playing D&D. Do you think that them playing D&D back in the 70s and 80s helped them on their actual career?
No doubt. There's absolutely no question. Especially when you look at who it is,
Mm-hmm.
you start to realize like, oh, okay, all right, that makes a whole lot of sense,
Right.
and
Like
when it comes
my
to
goal at Gary Con this year is to ask a couple of those people, like, did this actually help you? Like, out
yeah,
of curiosity, because that's a cool thing about conventions a lot of times is, especially when you're doing things like I'm doing here at interview setting and stuff like that, I have the opportunity to talk to those people and asking those hard questions like that to be curious if that is legitimately why people are now coming out and stating how much they enjoyed Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, we're talking people have built full companies around this that were A-list actors and things like that. So I mean,
oh
it's got to
yeah.
be something.
Well, so we got to interview David Johnson. I don't know if you've met him.
Mm-mm.
He used to work at Blizzard Activision.
Okay.
He's actually the guy who created the heart monitor for Call of Duty.
Wow.
He worked on a lot of the VFX for Call of Duty, and his company now does VFX for, I mean, a lot of games that you might have played. Um, so he's well up there in the industry. Incredible guy, so much fun to be around, and he has the most impressive collection of Dungeons and Dragons memorabilia I've ever seen in my life. Like
Oh,
we're talking from 1974
oh my
to the current
goodness.
day, and he's built like this whole dungeon in his basement with a game table. He's got speakers for like ambient sound during the game. He's got I think probably well over like 2,000 miniatures that he has hand painted himself. And but yeah, no, he said he got into it back in the 80s playing
Hmm.
VX, and it was like the moment he said he remembered riding home in the car and just like reading through that solo adventure in the VX set
Yeah,
and being like, this is it, this is this is where I belong,
right.
and following that passion has led him to be a
Full-blown game
renowned
designer and very
VFX
well known.
designer. Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
that's
exactly.
awesome.
And speaking of, meeting people at conventions and talking to
Yeah,
them and asking them all these questions, you're that's exactly what we've been doing all year.
yeah.
And my first foray into conventions was GaryCon this year.
Oh, okay.
And the I so I played for 22 years,
Yeah.
but my access to the game has been very limited to like a small circle of people.
Hmm.
I've had like a couple people from whenever I move, create a new group.
Right.
But again, for so long it's been such a hush hush subject.
Right.
I would say probably till about Stranger Things uh, came out. That was
Right.
that
No,
was
that
kind of
makes
like
sense.
the
Yeah.
that was the kick in the right direction. But I bumped into on accident Joe Manganiello walking into the merch hall and was turned around. There's this like almost 7 foot tall guy carrying a chihuahua, and it's like,
It's the
oh
most
hey,
hysterical thing in the world, but it's great.
he and Luke are so funny. They bring their dogs and just hang out all day.
Oh yeah, no. Yeah, Grogu is a joy. If you get any of the pictures at the end when Alphinius Goo and Luke got slimed, I'm the one holding the dog the entire time. And then I got to dump Luke, and then I got to dump a container on Luke because Bushra wasn't able to get up high enough for the last container. So I was like, fine,
Ah,
I just tipped it over. That's good. Yeah, but I've been working with GUI Cube for almost 4 years now, and there's I will tell you, um, if you ever get a chance, I would definitely reach back out to Alphinius and ask him to show you his Dungeons and Dragons collection because it makes most people's to shit. Like, oh my goodness, the amount of stuff that man has.
yeah,
He's
yeah.
never
No, I
not
imagine.
missed. He's not missed a single Kickstarter at the highest level for Dwarven Forge since it started.
Oh my
Like
goodness,
90s on, just Dwarven Forge
that's the
constantly.
dream, right?
Oh goodness,
Just
yeah.
have the whole Dwarven Forge set. Just
He,
like whatever I
yeah.
decide to come up with, I've got a set for it. Like
We
set the table.
bring. We brought to Gen Con this year 60 Tupperware containers, and that barely even and that's like three different like form or terrain sets, and that's it. And
Yeah,
I'm like, Alphinius, what are we doing here? Like, this is ridiculous.
that's the
Um,
definition of living your best life.
oh
Like,
yeah, I mean, and then he started a company on it because he wanted to do it, right?
yeah,
And
we're speaking with Stefan here in 2 weeks. We're flying out to Seattle. We're going to talk to him and Peter Atkinson.
that's awesome.
And I met Stefan at GaryCon, and he's got to be like one of the most fun people to be around.
Oh my
He's
goodness.
so excited at all times.
I have a Stefan story I'll tell very quickly. We were at Gary Con this year, and right before we got to Gary Con, I got my first Kickstarter set for the Reforge of the Forest for Dwarven Forge. It's not this last Star Forge one; it's right before that one. And my my occupation changed a couple years ago, and I started being able to have extra money, so I was able to actually fund the first one. My son and I sat and opened up boxes for like 4 hours on stream, and he wasn't able to be there, but Stefan recorded a personal message to my 9-year-old at the time saying he was so happy that he got to see him playing with the Dwarven Forge and that he can't wait to see what he builds. And I've never seen a child light up so much as that man. Like when he heard that, because he was like, "Wait, what, Dad?" And I was like, "Yeah, here," because we were during the concert where he just plays music, the DJ.
Yeah, the Black Sabbath.
Yep. So we just stepped off to the side while one of his songs was on, and he recorded like a 30-second video, and I sent it to my son, and he just lost it. It was great. It's good.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, that's beautiful.
The same thing like you said, though. He's just such a fun person to be around, and he's so humble. And when you hear his story, you're gonna like. Do you understand how he even became all this?
Yes. Okay. Yes. Of course, I've watched his documentary as well.
His documentary is very, very humbling, but it's also very important to see for people like us, where, those dreams can come true. Like he's like, I didn't do well in the normal space, but then all of a sudden I wanted this, so poof, now I have a company for it.
And I relate completely.
Yeah.
I was doing, this was like 6 years ago, I was doing landscaping and doing a lot of, work outside.
Yeah.
And I, picked up a camera and started, trying to make commercials for the company I was working for. And then I think it was like a year and a half after that, I started my company and was doing music videos. And I was a musician for probably musician and audio engineer for about 10 years or so.
Oh, awesome.
So I had quite a few connections. That was like kind of like my window in. And so I was doing music videos, which is of course like the peak of creativity when it comes to filmmaking.
Yeah.
There's no other area within the industry that you get to really stretch that creative muscle as much.
I mean,
so I
especially
got to have
10 years ago when music videos were still that off, like out of the normal. Like there wasn't just people on stage or anything. No, you were changing. People were in space. People were under the wall. Like it was all these cool over the top scenarios. So yeah, I can definitely imagine it'd be a good time.
I was coming in with a lot of either local artists or startup artists, people who had just started making music and really trying to compete with record labels.
Yeah.
And so my goal was to say like, okay, let's come up with some cool ideas. And we would use practical effects for everything. So I don't use VFX very much at all.
Yeah.
A lot of old filmmaking techniques, and the stuff that I've done is just so much fun. You get to dress up people, you get to go, build out sets and then pretend. I mean, it's essentially like scripted D&D, on a film set. And so then at the beginning of this year, I was on Facebook. So this is kind of like the story behind 50 Years of Fantasy. I was on Facebook and I got a message one morning. I woke up and it was from Ernie Gygax. And I was like, what?
Oh, excuse me?
yeah, no, exactly. I was like, surely this is like a fake account.
Yeah.
And so I read through his message, and he said he had liked a comment that I made in one of the groups that he was in, and then went to my page and saw that I was a filmmaker and asked if I wanted to come up and film some games at his house at Dragonland during GaryCon. And I was like, yes, absolutely, right?
When would I say no?
Right. So like a week later, Luke calls me and was like, hey, just wanted to see what this documentary is about. And like, I was immediately like, documentary? There was no plan for a documentary at that point.
Oh, wow.
And so I was like, I randomly just, kind of came up with something off the top of my head. And the initial concept for it, right, was a kind of like a compare contrast between old school and new school.
Yeah.
Which I would still like to do. That's a really cool concept, and there's a lot to talk about there, a whole lot to unpackage. But then as we started interviewing people and talking to people, we realized there's this underlying thread in the community that people talk about it, but it's not necessarily something that's like in the spotlight, right? There's so many people doing incredible things, doing everything they can to like make these events happen,
Right.
to put out, new products, to, help support people who are in the space and are just passionate about it. And we were seeing all of these people who were putting their best foot forward,
Right.
and I was like, these people need a spotlight. This is like, if Dungeons and Dragons is about anything, it's about the people who play it.
Yeah.
It doesn't it and that's kind of like the premise of the whole film is it doesn't matter who owns Dungeons and Dragons. The real owners of Dungeons and Dragons are people like you and
People
me
behind
who
the table.
play and love the game. Yeah, yeah. Because when you create your own world, when you create your own character, it immediately goes from this thing that this company made to now that's your D&D.
Right.
And that's just something that is so inspiring to me, is that there's no other game like that. Like if you're a fan of Skyrim, right, like you're playing on their software, you're playing on their templates, even if you customize it as much as you can, like
Mm.
you're still within that box, right?
Right.
But with Dungeons and Dragons, like you can take it absolutely wherever you want to
Oh
go
yeah.
with it.
Wherever your
Sky's
mind. And we've seen it so many times in the last. Now that we have social media, now that we have all these different avenues of information gathering, it is a possibility that is one of the best ways to see how far the mind can actually stretch. Because we go from high fantasy and then somebody taking that exact same idea and those exact same mechanics, and now we're throwing it into this whimsical fairy tale like blend, and then we're moving to sci-fi and all these different genres and settings, and they all have their own little tweak, or they all have their own little adjustment, and that is, like you said, there's nothing else like that out here.
right,
So,
right.
I mean,
That's
but
interesting. You mentioned sci-fi, because it's like that's part of what really helped to shape the game
yeah.
back in the 80s. Was you had your wargamer groups and then your sci-fi groups, and so the wargamers were there for like the rules, the mechanics, the
Mhm.
strategy, the tactics, but then your sci-fi people who were attending these sci-fi cons, and they were really into the story.
Right.
And so you had those two groups merge in a way through TSR's subsequent releases,
Right.
especially when you saw Dragonlance come out. That was really where story started taking a front seat. And so you have a lot of these different dynamics, right? So a lot of these different polarities. So you have your rules people, your story people. You have your people who think the game is best played this way, and then you have the people who think it's best played that way.
Right.
And at the end of the day, when these people come together at these conventions, like community is the final word.
Right.
It's we're all here to have fun, to enjoy each other's company, to laugh and have a good time. And I I've never seen a fist fight break out at a Dungeons and Dragons table about anything other than maybe like rolling a one. Like I had that might
I
be my own experience, but
I tell
it's
I tell people this when I've played my first time ever running a game. I was in high school, and the first game I ever ran, I got dice thrown at me and a chair thrown at me, and I realized that I'd probably done something wrong at that point. Um, we were,
but it was within the game, right?
but it was within the game. Oh yeah, no, I just made very
Yeah.
angry people in the game.
Right, so that's okay,
Yeah.
but that's still within the game.
Yeah.
Like what I'm talking about is like people don't necessarily bring their external baggage to the table.
Right.
Me and our producer Chris were talking on a podcast clip earlier this week about how it doesn't matter, where you come from, where your politics are, what your ideology is, what your beliefs are. Like when you come to play Dungeons and Dragons, that doesn't exist in the fantasy. And so like that's kind of what I'm referring to. It's like it has this unique capability of bringing people together to play a game where everything else kind of goes away for a
Yeah.
little bit, and that's really the kicker.
Yeah, no, it was an actual chair thrown at me, yes. But it was not a game chair thrown at me. No, it was an actual chair. And we talk, and when I go back home, if we run into those people, like we'll talk about that moment as if it, when it happened. But yeah, no, I was new at game mastering, and I didn't know how to dial down combat sometimes, and I still had the mentality in high school that the game master was against the players, so I was ruthless, and
Right.
I still am called like the deadly dungeon master because of that reason. Because I don't think I've had a single campaign in the last 4 years that I haven't at least killed off one character.
Well, I think that's something
But
that
I believe that risk is an important thing with a game like this, because otherwise you feel like you're invincible, and sometimes you have to be knocked down a peg or two in order to make sure that people realize that you're not invincible. But
right. So I've been writing for since I was like 12 years old. But I haven't really published any of my writing until recently, in support of the film. And then of course I've done a couple other articles on the side for my own interests.
right,
But this is the first, in the past like 6 months or so, it's the first time I've ever published my writing,
awesome.
to get feedback from people. And it's interesting to see that a lot of people share a lot of the ideas that I've kind of kept locked in my head for a while.
Oh yeah.
And one of those ideas I recently wrote an article about was play, and like the purpose and goal of play. And I was raised by a English professor, and so literature was a huge part
Yeah.
of my childhood. And I didn't always like it. It was you're going to read these books because it's going to help you, but I
don't
didn't
know
always.
how, and you don't know why, and you don't know when.
Yeah,
but
yeah. But play is the same way,
Yeah.
right? So the only difference between that and play is that with play it's kind of understood that you're probably going to have some level of fun, right? But I saw a post the other day that said no, fun is not the goal of the game, and I was like, that seems a little off. But I being raised by an English professor,
Yeah.
I really value the meaning of words and how we use them in
Yeah.
context. So I was like, okay, let me hear this guy out. Um, and he was talking about how when you play a game, your motivation is fun. Like you're motivated to get into the game by the idea that you're going to have fun, right? That's what gets you to the table. It's what gets you into the game.
Right.
But that's not necessarily the goal of the game. And he went on to explain. I ended up expounding on this quite a bit in my article, because I love this concept. But normally the goal or purpose of a game is not actually known to the players up front,
Right.
When some of the examples I used in my article were, if you play soccer, right? It's not till you're done with the game that you're like, you know what, I got a really good workout, or if you play chess, it's not till after the game where you're like, I feel like I understand it a little bit better now,
Right.
like my cognizant strategy is heightened.
Is heightened, right?
For having played it. And so with Dungeons and Dragons having such a wide range of possibility, it's kind of hard to pin down, what that purpose and goal might be. It's probably easier to say what it isn't than what it is. And so I think that upon closer inspection, what you realize is that the purpose of the game, whether it was intended by the creators or not, is to just have an experience.
Oh yeah.
And the result of that being the goal is that you learn something, right? And it's kind of like reading a book too.
Right.
If you read a really good book, once you're done with the book, you realize that you've learned something extremely important, but maybe you can't fully articulate what it is that is.
Yeah.
And I get that from Dungeons and Dragons as well. Like you walk away from the table having played a session and you're like, I feel like we all learned valuable lessons tonight. Like
right.
I don't know what those might be.
Yeah. We'll figure it out. I think
I'll figure it out on Friday.
I think that another neat thing I think about Dungeons and Dragons that I don't know if I've ever experienced anywhere else is that Dungeons and Dragons you can feel, you can live in a world that doesn't exist, but have the same emotions and the same connections that you would in the outside world, and that to me is an incredible experience. Because I did a lot of my gaming in my later years before I get out of the military, in areas that are not the best places to be doing it in. But I will tell you, I have more memories and more vivid memories of not only what we were doing in the game when we were doing it, but how my character was feeling, which to me makes sense and not, because it's not real, right? But it is at the same time. And it's the same thing when people talk about going through grieving, like if you lose a character and stuff like that, and you start seeing your players and your friends around the table having these strange emotions of loss, and you're like, hold up, but this is just a game, right? Like, is it though? Like, are we playing a game, or is it something else?
You're kind of straddling that line between the real and the weird.
Yeah.
Right? And I use the weird to kind of reference like something that would otherwise be seen as normal if it weren't for like that one little thing that's just off, right? Or that isn't something you would normally experience. And riding that line is very strange, because like you said, you know, like when you're sitting at the table and you know you have an experience that evokes an emotional reaction from you. You know, this is just a game. Right. It's like reading a book. These are just words on paper. Right. You know, but it still has a way of connecting with you, right, touching you, of actually making a tangible connection between the world of fantasy and the world of reality. And yeah, no, that is absolutely an astounding aspect of the game. I think that I think that's probably why it has such a large effect on mental health in a positive way, right? Because you're allowed to kind of experiment with emotions, experiment with behaviors, experiment with choices and decisions in a truly safe space, right? Right. You're not actually risking life and limb. And that, you know, that's kind of where my article went. Was it's very similar to the way that children will play like Knights and Dragons. You know, you go pick a good stick, heck yeah, in the woods as a sword, yeah. And so it's like the difference is like with pure imagination, right? The outcome is purely up to your whim, right? You know, like what do I feel should happen in this situation? Yeah. The dice are what kind of bring in that element of uncertainty. And I think that's kind of it's why I play you know, whatever we roll, that's what we roll. We're not, you know, we're not fudging the rolls.
How are we going to tell dies, like, can we tell the story? It's going to tell a story either way, no matter if it's a good outcome or a bad outcome. And I think that's interesting that we talk about that, is like, you know, however the die lies. And now we're seeing not only the original game being played like this, but a lot of TTRPGs have found ways to put more emphasis on how that die lies. You know, as much as, you know, we always talk about Dungeons and Dragons being the pinnacle of where all this came from. We've now got all these amazing RPGs coming out. The one I'm thinking of right off the top of my head, though, is the new one from Darrington Press called Candela Obscura, where it is fantasy, but it's this low fantasy, kind of more pulpy, like Pulp Fiction type feel. But you only, unless you roll a 6 on a 1 through 6, you're actually not succeeding completely, and everything has an alteration.
Ooh, I like that.
And so a 4 and a 5 are not actually succeeding. It's succeeding with an alternate outcome. So it's like the storyteller, or the lightkeeper in this case, will be able to utilize that down the road. So like, yeah, you were able to knock the gun out of the man's hand, but before you did, you didn't realize the gun was fired, and now you burned your hand as reaching out for it. Like, there's always there's an instance of change and reaction and things like that. And a 1 through 3 is an automatic fail. So I mean, 3 out of 5, 3 out of 6, you're automatically failing, and 4 and 5, you're not really succeeding completely. But I think
it kind of opens up the floor for improv. You know, improv. Like everything is yes and, or yes but, or no but. You know, and so
comes from the people who created the game. But you know, there is that.
Yes. Well, I think that's something that I've noticed is with For instance, with the old school games, and this is something that I believe Matt Finch said,
Okay.
who wrote Osric and Swords and Wizardry. He said something like, in the older editions, it was kind of like reading through the Dungeon Master's Guide. You know, it was like uh, uh, sending raw lightning through a circuit board. You know, now it's more of like a directed course, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have a lot of especially in like the newer Dungeon Master's Guides since 3E, a lot of examples of like how you could take this outcome further. What could happen after this? Giving you options, right?
Yeah.
And I would call them prompts. And it's something that we use in creative writing, where we say, okay, if I've got writer's block, here's a prompt, start writing. And it's
Right.
something to kind of like really spark that imagination. But you didn't have that in the early editions, so it was kind of like whatever happens in my mind as we're playing is going to
Right.
happen. And so I think that there's a large difference between generations when it comes to that, especially when like it comes to reading through those rule books.
Mm-hmm.
I have a set of first edition rule books as well, and they're written in that high Gygaxian prose that you got to dig through with a dictionary beside you, and it's interesting how inspiring the language is in those books. Like
Oh
he
yeah.
doesn't necessarily write it as a manual for play. He writes it like there's these whole passages in the books that are like you feel like this is like an ancient tome that you've discovered. And I don't really feel like I get that from more modern iterations of the game. But I think that was like his way of giving you
Right.
a he's like, I'm gonna tell you the rules, and while I'm telling you the rules, we're gonna sprinkle in
Some
some
storyline.
arcane
Yeah. Some
goodness.
some
Yeah,
sneaks. Yeah. And
yeah,
I think so. That's interesting you say Gygaxian because that is very modern. That's very similar to some of the older book writers as well. I mean, if you go back to the original way of um, Tolkien and Lewis and that stem of writers,
Le Guin,
yeah,
Vance,
you start
yeah,
looking
all
at
of them.
how they actually wrote it and compared to how it was published. There's
Yes,
writing on the sides of pages, and there's little inserts, and there's little idea like it's all over the place.
yeah,
But
yeah.
it made it very unique to read. Um, I actually just started a book just a couple of weeks ago on audiobooks. I haven't listened to audiobooks in a while, but I was trying to get back into the mindset of like, as a storyteller, what am I missing? What can I add to my stories? What can I do to this? So I started diving into newer stuff, and everybody was yelling at me like, you need to read the Brandon Sanderson books. You need to read the Brandon Sanderson books. And
Definitely.
the first thing I noticed was that specific moment right there because on audiobook they just read it, right? Like it's said it. But at the end of every chapter there's always something going back to a logbook or something going back to a story in the past. And that immediately brought me back to those moments of reading Lord of the Rings when I'm just like, okay, I've read the story, but then there's these little writings on the side of the book, and I'm like, well, what's this say? And you start reading into those things.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and
So
another thing is the difference between audiobooks and reading the
yeah,
the words on the page, for me at least, is so fantasy is obviously cluttered with all of these really really complicated names from distant lands, and it's
yeah,
like to say them sometimes doesn't do it.
mm-mm.
It's the way they spelled it. Like there's sometimes you say a word and you're like, I think it was probably spelled like this, and you
Yeah,
see it spelled and you're like, oh wow, I was way off the
dead
mark.
wrong.
But
Like,
but yeah, yeah, but the spelling of it itself evokes your
mm,
imagination. And so that's something that really hooks me, especially when I'm reading like Jack Vance. He has a lot of really weird names.
mm,
Fritz Lieber, for instance, Fafford and the Grey Mouser, right?
yeah,
I think it's Fafford who has a like a weird demonic patron kind of thing
yeah,
named Neengobble of the Thousand Eyes or something like that. And
right.
like And like when you think of like Ningobble, like you're thinking gobble, like Gobble, right?
Yeah,
And like that's not as imaginative. But then when you see it spelled, it's Gauble, like a bobble, but you
yeah,
replaced the
the
B with
B
the
with a
G.
G.
And so it does something different to your mind when
Well,
you're
yeah, because
reading
you
it.
can start thinking differently. Because, like you said, of the thousand eyes. So instead of me thinking a giant mouth, like almost like a beholder, I'm now thinking more of a full creature of eyes, like because it's
Yes,
so like it
yes.
definitely shifted quickly because like you said, Bobble isn't spelled like Gobble isn't spelled the same way. So you're like, okay, what does that match to me? How can I understand this better in my own mindset? And
Right.
that's really cool. I really like
Yeah, and
that.
and and you know, being having a history in fantasy literature, having read so much of it, it's like there's a deep appreciation for the use of language. I got to talk with Lawrence Schick this past week. He lives in Dublin now, I think,
Hmm.
but he wrote a lot of the narrative for Baldur's Gate 3.
Oh, okay.
Uh, and he was also I believe, the product designer for Basic and Expert.
Oh, wow.
He and Tom Moldvay actually invented Mystara, or the known world.
Oh, okay.
And
Or the known world.
yeah, that was what it was called back, when Basic first came
Yeah,
out.
yeah, yeah.
And so that's one of my favorite settings, and so I was super excited to talk to him about it. And he made a post, I think, either last week or the week before, where he was talking about, he's getting older, and some things never change, and one of those things that never changes is writing really good English sentences. And it just popped in my mind. I have a memory of a single. It was actually like the length of a whole paragraph, but it was one sentence by Ursula Le Guin in A Wizard of Earthsea.
Hmm.
I think it was like the first sentence of a chapter too. And I remember I read that one sentence probably like 7 times the first time I read it, because it was such a beautiful sentence.
Yeah.
Like everything about it just put me in that moment. And it was like you don't see that kind of writing anymore.
Mm-mm.
You see a lot of everything has to be clear and concise and very quick. We have to get across our idea. And then you read Tolkien and he'll talk about a tree for like 9 pages, and
Right.
and of course, if you're the kind of person who just, really has to, get on with the story, then,
Yeah.
that's boring, and it really just kind of lags or
Right.
drags on you. But if you're the kind of person who does have an appreciation for the language and understands that level of complexity,
Yeah.
it's like you're watching someone talk about a tree in a way that relates to like 19 different things.
Yeah.
And it's like that's skill.
Well, not
That's
only
mastery.
that, like you said, it's words, right? It's different when maybe it's not. And I didn't think about this till now, but maybe it's not that he's trying to hit it in 19 different ways, but he's trying to hit it in a way that you will connect with, right? Like,
Yes.
because
Yes.
I'm noticing this not for myself, but my son and I have started reading at night, and he's like, "Well, I'll read it, Dad." And then when we come to something I can't read, can you kind of spell it out? Like, help me say what it is. And there's even words in his books, and I'm like, okay, well, let's take it for a second. Let's figure out exactly what this means
Let's
because,
sound it out.
well, no, not only that, but like, I'll go on Google and I'm like, okay, what does this actually mean? Because like, I know it's a cliff,
Ah,
or like it's trying to describe something, but there's always, if they're using a specific word, there's a reason for it, right? Like certain
right.
words you just
Right.
don't use unless there's a direct reason you're using it. Because we're reading the Hardy Boys right now,
Oh,
and
beautiful.
one of the words that they were talking about was like the side of a cliffside, but they used a specific word, and my brain is not going to kick it up right now. But I remember it because I had to actually look it up and be like, okay, I get it's a cliffside, but why are we using this word specifically? And it was like, oh, it's a natural cliffside out that rocks are jutting out from, to like that's where boats would wreck into. And I was like, oh, okay, so you're trying to give that same emotion of giving something that's much different than just you're standing over top of a cliffside, and you're like, okay, I can see that. But now when you explain it that way, I'm like, okay, now I can see more.
There's a deeper implication. Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
yeah. And you're saying more with less in
Right.
that instance. Yeah. And I think that like what you said about what Tolkien, not necessarily trying to say something 19 different ways. He's trying to say something in enough ways that every reader will at some point get it,
Pick it up. Yeah.
and
Especially like
that's not easy.
no, especially the Silmarillion. I have
Oh
tried
man.
4 different times to read the darn thing, and I finally put it on audiobook because I will tell you, Andy Gerkis is probably one of my favorite listeners. I will listen to his voice just to enjoy it because
Yes.
it's so
No,
good.
he killed that entire audiobook. I've read it I think 5 or 6 times, and then I've listened to the audiobook probably like 10 to 20
Yeah.
times. Um, and something that always pops out to me is the musicality of the language.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Tolkien drew a lot from Saxon and Celtic and
Mm-hmm.
Old English and Old Germanic languages, and there's a sing-songy nature
Right.
to it,
Well,
right?
Elven
Uh,
is like it's a song. It's not supposed to be it's not supposed to be written. I will tell you somebody interesting, and as much as it's very hard to understand a lot of the Elven that he speaks, a person to listen to because I got it before I got the Andy Gerkis one version of it is Christopher Lee did a version of the Silmarillion as well.
yep, yep.
He's very certain things I'm like, I don't like how you read you read this, but certain things, especially the elven words, it's so flowy with him. Like it's just
Hmm.
flows off the tongue like a song. And you're right,
Yeah.
it is definitely that uniqueness. It'd be cool to have uh, a dramatic mix of the two of them. Like let
Yes.
him speak all Elven and then everything else be said by Andy, and I'd be perfectly. I would probably buy it again just because.
I should probably just do that. Like I'll just like throw both of them into Logic and like, cut out every little spot
Oh my
where
goodness! Sell the combined version. Like, ta-da! Here you
Yes.
go.
Yes. Yeah.
Here's
Get
your
sued
here's your
into
80%, or here's your
right.
40% to Andy. Here's your 40% to Chris. Here's your
Yeah.
10% to Tolkien, and I'll take the last 10. Like
Yeah.
for doing all the work.
To pay off my
To
lawsuits
pay off
since
my
I'm sued into
lawsuits.
oblivion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
But no,
great.
I the all of this plays into the 50 years of fantasy idea where there's so much like at first so I met Chris, our producer, probably 2.5 months after I did the initial interviews at GaryCon.
Okay.
And so originally the plan was for me to do just like a 15-20 minute documentary that I was going to, toss up on YouTube. And we got to talking about it, and we turned our entire, like every bit of our company, we like
That's
reprioritized, and we're like,
awesome.
this is what we're doing. And so like, we put every last penny that we could possibly spare into, getting this thing rolling and trying to market it correctly and get to as many people as we can to get a full story here. And something that really was a challenge at first was when we were storyboarding. It was like, because normally when you storyboard for a film, you've got 2 to 6 months to like actually dedicate to storyboarding. And like I
Right.
was like right in the center of it. I was like, we got to release this year. It's the 50th year of fantasy,
Mm-hmm.
and so everything's been on a slam schedule.
Yeah.
But we're trying to make sure we're paying very close attention to all of our details and consistently and cohesively gather this story together. And that was one of our concerns, was like, can we do this? Can we make this 90 minutes? Can we make a full feature-length film? And as we've been piecing it together and reviewing all of the interviews and going over our storyboards again before we go into post-production, it's like the real challenge actually might be keeping it at 90
90
minutes.
minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, like we could honestly probably make an 8-hour film,
Yeah, I
And
mean, you
I
got to
think,
think of who you're speaking to, though. I mean, these people have been writing and talking and reading for literally decades, and you're expecting to be able to cut all this enough information out. I mean, I could listen for 3 hours. I could listen to Ed Greenwood just talk for 3 hours. Like I've done
oh,
it.
I
I did it at
no doubt.
GaryCon this year. I was just like, just listening.
I interviewed him at GaryCon, and we went to a little side room.
Yeah.
I think it was actually the room that they later played Bronstein in
Okay.
later in the day,
Yeah, yeah.
and so it's one of those little side rooms with little panel walls
Yep,
there,
yep, yep.
and I was like, can you, I don't want to, take too much time away. I know you got games to run. Could you give me like 20, 30 minutes? He was like, absolutely. And so we go back here, we start talking, and I look at my watch halfway through, and I was like,
Oh,
he's going strong.
like,
I can't stop him right now. But I knew he had a game at 12, and so it was like 11:45, and I was like, I hate to cut you off, Ed, but you have a game to run in like 15 minutes, so you got to get out of here.
that's
But
awesome.
no, he was such a joy to talk to, and he and I've actually kept up an email correspondence since
That's
then,
awesome.
and he's just such a pleasure to speak with. His love for fantasy, I would say, is like right on par with Tolkien.
Hmm.
Like the man has an understanding of how to build a city that I there's no way I would ever come close to that to that par.
No, I mean I mean, we give a lot of love to R.A. Salvatore as being like the Forgotten King or Forgotten Realms, like grow. But really, if you take a look in the background of it, and a lot of the world building has been done by Ed, and he's fleshed out so much. But he's also been very humble on the fact that he's allowed other people to flesh out so much of that world, and it
Yeah,
still
yeah.
ties together. Like it still all works together. Um,
Well, I think that something else that I hadn't really, I guess, thought about was the way that Forgotten Realms was acquired by TSR.
mhm.
Because the story goes something like this. They were looking for a new setting for the world, and they had been seeing Ed's articles in Dragon Magazine.
Mm.
And they called up Ed at the library that he still works at. And they were like, is this at Greenwood? We would like to know, do you have a full campaign setting, or are you just making this up as you go? And he said yes. Uh, so they were like, well, we need more. And I think if I'm remembering correctly, I think that first check they wrote him was like $500. And it was like that was the start of Forgotten Realms being this like massive
Massive
IP,
IP. Yeah.
and it's the development that's gone into it over the years is just insane. And how being a world builder myself, I have a world that I've been developing for 22 years, and I'm just now putting stuff out on through my Patreon,
Hmm.
and the just wrapping my head around letting other people build in my world, like that takes some guts.
It
Uh,
does.
because it's like it becomes very precious to you, like this is my baby. This is something I've put all my blood, sweat, and tears into, all of my
Hmm.
imagination into, and other people are gonna build in it, so like understanding how he kind of very willingly and excitedly handed that off to people, like
Yeah.
you take this and let's see what you do with it.
Right.
It is very reminiscent of the way he would describe his few conversations that he actually had with Gary Gygax, where they would meet at conventions, and the conversation would be like, "Well, how do you handle when a character is feeble-minded?" And it wasn't necessarily a like, how do you interpret the rules? It
Right.
was, if this happened at your table,
How
how
are
would
you gonna
you
handle?
handle it?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I think that he has that innate curiosity to see how other people's minds work,
Hmm.
and how their imaginations kind of like the gears turn.
Yeah.
And that's definitely something that I I share, but not at that level.
Yeah.
Like I definitely want to. I love seeing other people's work, like seeing Gavin Norman's work on Dolmenwood. That's the most impressive campaign setting that I've seen since Forgotten Realms.
Mm.
And it, beautiful to see how someone else's mind put that together.
Right.
But as far as like sharing my world with other people to write on, that's something that I've definitely been considering over the past couple of years, because I want to make it, something that I can share with the whole world. And
Right.
there's no way I can do it myself with my limited time. So, but it's very humbling to see someone create something so big and so impactful, and then share that for other people to tweak on their own.
Oh yeah. I mean that was kind of where my my professional level kicked in on from TTRPGs is I get the opportunity from Alphinius Goo to be like, hey, we're writing a world that's collaborative. And I was, what do you mean? And they told me, and they're like the last Kickstarter we just dropped, well, we dropped almost 2 years ago now, finally is coming to fruition. And Darkenhaven was written by over 40 people. Like,
That's wild.
you don't
That's
see
so
that,
cool.
right? Like, I mean, one district of the town was written by 6 people because they would be like, here, this is your team. You take this and you go do this.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
And
And I love what you guys are doing with like the whole box set thing, right?
Oh yeah,
that
because
was
it's him though. Like as much as everybody says it's a group effort, it's him driving that force because that's the world he lived in when it was at its peak to him, which is that second edition box set. He wants more at the table than just a book, right? Like that's his thing. And to me, I think the coolest thing about that is that is bringing it back. And I know with restrictions and with distance, virtual tabletops are such a huge thing nowadays. But when you're at a table with your friends and you're able to give them physical things, it makes the world feel that much more tangible and that much more realistic than it does me just being over top of a screen and being like, hey, this is the map we're going to use today. Like it just...
Yeah.
If I'm handing you an item card, if I'm handing you an image that says this is what you're looking at, it just means it hits more. It hits harder.
I'm really big on like spell cards and magic item cards and stuff like that. Like I'll actually, I've got templates that I've made and I'll print them out and I'll laminate them, cut them out with like little rounded corners so they look all professional. And like that's a big thing for me because it gives someone something to hold in their hand. I play with my 10 and 6-year-old occasionally right now on weekends, and something that I've been bringing or I bought on eBay was like a bag of actual gold, silver, and copper coins.
Oh, so you can just
and so when they find treasure, you're like, this is the treasure you found, and like they eat that up.
Oh yeah,
like that's the. Like we did one Theater of the Mind game, and they're like, "Can we bring out like all the miniatures and the coins and the stuff again?" And I was like, "Yes, absolutely, we can."
Yeah.
But it's like that is part of what really drew me in as a kid was like I was drawing these maps on graph paper, and like as I was describing them, my players were also mapping their own versions of what I was describing, and like comparing the maps afterwards and realizing, like, that's not at all what I had on here, so they're lost,
Yeah.
and then handing out stuff, showing pictures. I used to go online and find whatever pictures I could to illustrate like a monster that they came across, and like, this is what you see, and it's like, ooh, that adds that extra element in there, and I think that will always be a large element of the community because you're seeing you saw the pushback for 4th edition, and then you're seeing it again as they're saying they're going all in on digital. You do have the younger generation who loves the screens, who loves being able to manipulate. Like they're very savvy with it, so it's very quick. It's not clunky. But for a lot of us who came from the 90s where we didn't have all these things and we were in that transitionary period into the digital from analog, it's like it can actually slow the game down. Like, hold on, let me click over 5 windows to figure out where I put that.
And I'll say like that has definitely gotten easier over time just because we had to get used to it, right? Like COVID really changed things for us on the idea of we had to get used to the online world and we had to develop more and more. What's interesting to me though is that there is a loss of reaction on a screen to me. I can legitimately tell the same story. I could verbatim write my story out and do the exact same thing with the same players and put them in my table and put them on a screen, and I can guarantee it because I've done it before with friends of mine where they didn't realize they were being told the same story because of the fact that there's so much of a distraction on the screen.
Yes,
Especially if
yes.
you're not playing on video. Like, I don't understand how people can just do audio. I really can't. I can't do it. I
I
have
will
to.
say one of the most fun experiences I've had
Mm-hmm.
personally was on Discord, text only, right?
Mm.
So it's very reminiscent of like the old MUDs,
Mm-hmm.
and I had it was funny because I hadn't played in a couple years, and this was like right in the middle of my career doing music videos, and so the people that I got to play, they were all like, these guys in metal bands and rock bands, and like, they're all hard asses, and so it's like these big tough guys, and then within 10 minutes of playing over text, I've got all like five or six of these guys talking in almost perfect Shakespearean English, and it's like it was wild, like the lack of hesitancy or the lack of trepidation around like embarrassing yourself by
Mm-hmm.
doing a voice or something like that. That was gone,
Oh
right? Because
yeah.
you don't have video, you don't have audio, it's just text.
Right.
And so we played, I think, for about 4 or 5 weeks continuously, right? Because if it's over text, you can just whenever you have time
Yeah.
during the day, you just add something in there. Um, played for about 4 or 5 weeks, and the story was incredible. Like it blew my mind. I was like,
Right.
I wish I could do this at the table. That would be awesome,
Yeah.
And it's like you got to have the right group for that kind of
Oh
thing,
yeah.
because you do have it is more common for D&D games, to kind of like devolve into comedy throughout the course of a session, which is great. Like that's
Yeah.
what you're there for. You're there to unwind, hang out with
Yeah.
friends, right? Um,
I am not
but
that
for
game master. I am not that game master.
I really prefer, a more serious, like
That's
we're
how
gonna
I am.
pretend we're our
Right.
characters, like let's write a story. Which actually brings me back to a point that I skipped over earlier because I
Sure.
was kind of trying to figure out what to talk about first. But there was a conversation that I had the other day that was talking about how a lot of people look at the difference between old school and new school as role play versus role play, right?
Hmm.
ROLL versus ROLE. And normally, and this is what's interesting, normally they say the new school is ROLL because you have like skill checks and all these different things that kind of like handle the story for you. And that the old school is ROLE. But the interesting thing to me is that it actually seems like it's the other way around, right?
Yeah.
Because with the old school, like the story is not written. I've
Yeah.
seen a lot more frequently and of course this is also the Matt Mercerization of gameplay, where you kind of have this epic story, where the
Yeah.
characters can't die because they're too important. They're the
Right.
main characters. So you're almost treating it like a movie. You're
Mm-hmm.
acting out a part for a story that's almost already written, right? But when you're playing the old school versions of the game, it's you don't know what the story is. Like you're gonna find out later. It's after the game that you have a
Right.
story to tell,
Yeah.
And so like when you start the game, you don't know if any of you are gonna make it out alive.
Right.
And so like that's a very interesting aspect of or interesting comparison between the two.
Hmm.
And I like doing that a lot, is kind of looking at things analytically and being like, what's the real difference here,
Right. Well, I mean,
because
I
you have your
think.
edition wars, and
Yeah.
that just seems silly to me. Like that's like the internet. In that I feel like the internet invented that. It was like
The
it's like
edition
we're
wars.
yeah, we're all in these forums talking. We have nothing else to do. Like, you know what? First edition's the best. Fight me on it.
Yeah.
Like
Fight
so.
me.
So
Okay.
I think that there's some interesting conversations to be had
Right.
about the differences between these different systems. But I think that what it really boils down to is that the the minutia is not really what we're the
Mm.
rules minutia is not important. It's
Right.
more about the higher concepts, and that's something I would like to explore more in depth with a future documentary as well. I would love to do that. That would be so much fun.
Have to keep an eye out on that one, won't we?
Yeah, yeah,
Well, we've went way past our hour, which is perfectly fine. This is one thing I love about the tavern is that
yeah.
you never know where the story's going to go. Um, kind of like old school D&D, right? Like you don't know where
Right.
the story's heading, but it's going to head somewhere.
The sun's coming up, and we should probably all go to bed.
Yeah.
But like,
Um,
let's be
so
on the next table.
before we have, of course, last call, what we're gonna do though is we're gonna take any questions from the chat, and I've got one right away. It says, in terms of story, how do you address the aspect of role versus role in the world building aspect? Interesting.
In world building?
In world building.
Ah, okay. So like, I may be misunderstanding the question, but I think it might be referring to the differences between like generating a world.
Right. So
And
like in
and
terms
like
of NPCs, players, and monsters, how do you take a concept like mechanics of the dice to world build for you to help you world build, or do you completely flesh it out yourself and then add those mechanics into the game?
it honestly depends on the day. Um, I think that I mean, there's definitely days where I've sat down. I'm like, I want to have some fun and play by myself.
Yeah, yeah,
So I roll up some NPCs, roll up some like a climate for a
yeah.
region, and like I'm just gonna do a thought exercise and develop this. But most of the time, especially when it comes to my own world of Elamore, like it is. I try to stick as close to the style of like the greats, like Tolkien and Vance, where this world is emerging, but it's emerging from here, and what is in here includes everything that's outside too. So
Right.
I'm kind of like interpreting the real world into fantasy.
Mm,
And so a lot of it does come from my own imagination, and I try to write it out as much as possible, especially when it comes to like lore. Like
right.
that's the big one. When it comes to NPCs and towns, though, like unless it's crucial, I like to see what the dice give me. That's
Yeah,
always fun.
that's always fun. I will say though, is if people have never used them, rolling tables are great to spark intrigue and like curiosity in your own world building. I use it on occasion when I'm just like, I don't know what would go here, or I don't know what I'm going to be getting into here. Let me see what the dice have to say. And normally it's funny though, because I've never just picked, like, especially with random encounter type stuff, I'll roll a random encounter up and then I'll use that encounter and build the story around it. Like, it's not
Oh
going to be
yes.
me just being like, yep, we're traveling, so we're going to run into this random thing. Like, no, no, no. There has to be something that makes sense here.
Have you
Um,
seen Matt Finch's Tome of Adventure?
I haven't.
Or Tome of Adventure Design.
No, I haven't. I
The
might have
book
to look.
is this thick.
Hey, I'm down.
All it is tables, and some of them, like a lot of them, are just words, like
Right.
random words.
Yeah.
And he's even got like random words written up and down on the margins, and like so, like every single page is just to like get your brain working.
Yeah.
Like word association.
I mean,
Um,
we talked about this a couple times on here. Uh, like the random NPCs, the random traps and random encounter books, all from Ashford, I think is or Ashworth. My brain's not working, and I can't find the book off the top of my head. Oh, there it is. I knew I had it right next to me because I keep this thing as like a. So, Random Encounters, the Game Master's book.
oh yes,
All of these
yes.
books are great. They're great ideas to just pick up real fast. You're like, I don't know what to do with this, and then you run with it, and then you decide to design from that.
Yeah, D30 Sandbox is another. The D30 books are really good too. I love those. There's like D30 Hexcrawl, D30 Sandbox,
Yeah.
D30, like all sorts of things, and they're extremely
Yeah.
insightful.
Here's an interesting one. Given how near and dear your homebrew world is to you, how do you address players who take a yes and approach to their characters, even if it clashes with lore that you have yet to divulge?
I love it. I will say that's the one thing I absolutely adore, right? So if a player is we're on an adventure to find an ancient sword that's hidden in a tomb,
Mm-hmm.
and they say maybe I haven't developed the lore behind the sword. I just know that's what I want to run the adventure about.
Mm-hmm.
One of the players says, "Oh, I think my cousin heard about that sword once from his great grandfather, and he said this about it, and I'm like, that's beautiful. We're running with it.
Yeah.
Like that is that's the magic of the early editions. I feel is like that like emergent storytelling, and you have to let the story emerge, right?
Right.
You can't force it to emerge. It's one of those things where it's going to happen of itself. And when it does, if you kind of follow that flow, it's really, really interesting, the stories that'll come out of that.
Yeah.
I like to be surprised too as a dungeon master,
Yeah.
So
100%. I think two things with this. One, you'd be shocked at how given, because I've had this happen multiple times where I'm like, okay, everybody's giving me their backstories. We're starting. We've ran through the first like, let's kind of unite people and make them feel like they're part of a team now. And then you start going back and you start reading backstories, and you're like, but I never said, like, hold on, this goes like I can pull this string to this person, I can pull this string to this person, and now you're weaving this web of things that you're like, I didn't see this at first, but now that the players are playing the way they are, and then like stuff like you're talking about, it's like, oh, my cousin heard this about the story. It doesn't. Here's the cool thing about that. It doesn't have to be true though.
yes,
Because
unreliable narrator.
yeah,
Yes,
because they're rumors, right? It's no
right,
different than you saying, I heard so and so's doing this down the street. Like, it could be true. Who knows?
right, right.
But it could not be true too, right? How do you deal with races though in your world? One thing
In
I have
what?
a really, I don't like the, and I kind of, I'm gonna take this from Phineas Goo in the Goo Cube world. Is it's like having to come up with where races are coming from or how races become to be in a world that's yours if you never have thought about that. Like, how do you deal with something like that?
So I'm a
Tabaxis, bird folk, lion folk, like all these just strange off the world races. Penguin folk, like,
right.
come on, let's
Yeah,
throw something nuts out here.
yeah. Um, Personally, the way that I do, so Elamore, my world,
Mm-hmm.
is very, very traditional fantasy. In fact, I don't even keep a lot of the monsters
Okay.
from Dungeons and Dragons in there. Like it is very, very like British folklore
Okay.
uh, meets, like some of the weirder pulp
Mm.
fiction. So like, Lankmar and the Dying Earth and stuff like that. Those are cool to add in. But when it comes to where these things come from, there is a very, very, very deep and methodically designed history behind fantasy symbolism,
Mm.
which could be another documentary. That's something I love is the symbolism behind fantasy, right? Because you have the elves, right, and
Yeah.
they're actually symbolizing that desire within humanity to live forever,
Right.
right? And what would that look like?
Right.
And so elves kind of give us that look into what eternity would feel like and how we would handle
And
that,
it's a little darker than you expect at first.
Yes, yes.
I
And
think
another thing
Tolkien
is
definitely hit the nail on the head with that one.
yes, yes. He calls it the long defeat.
Mm-hmm.
And that's beautiful to me because that's exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so even when you get into like orcs, right? So a couple years back, there was this whole debacle about orcs being indicative of certain cultures or certain people or whatever, and it's like that's overlaying modern social values and understandings on top of what has been existing for hundreds of years.
Right.
They may not have always been called orcs. I think Tolkien actually coined orcs, and the actual root of that is Oxford Rowing Club because he hated Oxford. So if you want to be honest about where the name came from, that's what I heard, and that was from supposedly Christopher Tolkien.
I
But
wouldn't be shocked. I would not be
but the
shocked.
but the root of what orcs are, right? In Tolkien's world, they are
Yeah.
elves that were twisted,
Right.
right? They were tortured and made to suffer, and what comes out of that is this primal urge to survive,
Mm.
this chaotic nature, right? And so like that's the primal part of humanity. So all of the races in fantasy are supposed to be
A symbol.
aspects of human nature, kind of
Ah.
condensed down, right? So
Yeah.
dwarves are like, the tough, overly manly, kind of thing, and
Yeah.
then halflings are that like peaceful, like I just want to chill and
Well,
watch TV
I mean,
shows and play
also
board
you
games.
think about like the way I at least see a halfling is halflings are that childlike nature, of people. Like it's
Hmm.
everyone, right? Like it's the ability to enjoy the simplicity of life.
Yeah,
And
yeah, that moment of wonder before fear
yeah,
actually takes hold.
which
Yeah,
is
no,
funny
I agree.
because really after you think about, especially until you start diving into like the beginning versions of the Hobbit, like very similar to that mentality. It's like they were the sheltered one. They were the one before everything started to affect them. Um, I give an example. It's going to make no sense to some people because they've never seen the show. But have you ever seen Kids Next Door? The old
Yes.
TV show, like that is
Yeah.
it, right? Like
Uh-huh.
it's before you've lost all of that innocence. Like once
Yes.
you're being tainted by fear, tainted by death, things like that, all of a sudden you're starting to change. But halflings are
Right.
not that supposed to be that way. They're supposed to enjoy that mentality of simplicity and enjoying just the little things in life. And it's definitely um, a unique concept. And I never thought about that. And now I want to dive into that more of
Yeah.
what a
Yeah.
race really is in
Yes.
fantasy,
One of
and
my favorite ones
pull
is
away from the idea of just the giving it a name. Like this is the purpose of this. Like this is what we're trying to describe. So,
right.
okay,
Right.
which one are you
I
going to try
think,
to?
yeah, so let's squeeze this one in. Gary Gygax,
Mhm.
when he created the Drow, right?
Mm,
In I think it was in the G series, with the giants,
yeah.
because they were the real masterminds behind what was going on. Um, the Drow, I believe, have been, pinned as like some cheap shot at like feminism or something like that,
Mm,
which I don't think is fair,
I don't
because
either.
I think that what they actually symbolize is the fact that power corrupts regardless, right? So
Mm,
the idea was that when they were banished, uh, they decided, okay, well, men led us down this path of
mm-hmm.
of of corruption, so we're going to let women take over, and the same thing happens, right? It doesn't
Right.
get any better, right? And so that's kind of that inner struggle that we have as human beings, where we don't know how to handle
Mm-hmm.
power, and that's why it's dangerous.
Right.
And it comes with loads of responsibilities, because it's like this thing is very volatile, and it can take you over. And
Yeah.
you see that in Lord of the Rings, you see that in Jack Vance, you see that in every single fantasy story. And so it was no different with the Drow. I think it
Right.
was just more a different angle of looking at it. And like, so that's what I try to do when I'm doing races in my world, is I'm like, what part of human nature does this represent, and how do I articulate that within the realm of
Mm-hmm.
fantasy?
I love that.
Yeah.
And I hate to say that we are a half hour over what we normally are on the show. Um, although I will say that I have gotten so many little nuggets of just enjoyment from this talk,
Same here.
and I
Same here.
really hope that you do get the opportunity to hit these extra documentaries like old versus new and the symbolism of, man, this one about races of fantasy is such a cool idea because it has been changed over time to have this social understanding of that's not where it was supposed to be.
Right. We're
We're
seeing a lot of things through social lenses that are kind of making things very difficult to like to move around in.
mm,
And I think that we're making things more complicated for ourselves than we need to,
mm,
because they're already
yeah.
complicated as can be,
Like
you know?
let's stop putting labels on these and stating like all orcs are evil. No, it's not that they're evil, but it's stating these are the concepts that this this type of society would be, or this type of culture would be. Um, and I think it's the other thing interesting about is that a lot of the races in those old times are based on actual cultural races that were like cultural people at the time. Like, this was the high nobles, or this was the, the aristocrats and those types of things. But in the end, those people were changed because of greed or survival, things like that. Like,
Yes.
you take orcs and you're like, okay, I can add orc though, and I can look at a very like nomadic Viking world with an orc, because I can say that survival, power is the the command of this organization. And I take those concepts and I go, it doesn't have to be an orc, but anybody living in that mentality is going to live that way. Like, there's no, and if
Right.
you're not, you're going to be ostracized immediately because you aren't surviving the same way everyone else is around you.
Yeah. I like to think of myth as just history for people with imagination. So you're kind of like you same way you would learn from history. You don't want to repeat the same mistakes because you want to learn those lessons. Myth is the same way. Myth is just providing metaphors for these things so that we can understand them in different ways.
Yeah. No, that's a great way. And I'm going to call it on that one, because that was an awesome
Yeah.
quote right there.
Thank you.
Myth, that is beautiful. Myth is history in fantasy, pretty much, which is awesome. Well, Blake, I hate to say goodbye, because this has been such an amazing conversation to have with you.
Absolutely.
And I'm looking forward to hopefully more down the road.
Oh, I would love to. I would love to.
For those that stuck around for the entire night, thank you for just coming to talk with us and add your questions. Go check out 50yearsoffantasy.com. Support this. This is something we need in this world so badly right now, because there's so much craziness going on. We need our passion for fantasy to return to us so that we can have that childlike comfort that we've had for many, many years. Check out Blake. Keep him employed. We need these documentaries. I promise you. Blake, is there anything else you want to say before we close tonight?
Basically yeah. So this film is being crowdfunded. So we have a list of support tiers on our website. We plan on running a Kickstarter in addition to that. Not sure how the details of that are working out right now, because I'm not over that part of it. But over on our website, if you go to 50 Years of Fantasy, click the little 3 lines in the corner there, you can go to Fantasy Funds, and there's a number of tiers that you can use to donate towards the film, and each one of them comes with a number of rewards that we're putting together for all of our sponsors. And the very top tier, we're so blessed to have the opportunity to give away, I think it's 6 seats to Ernie Gygax's table to play a game the night of the premiere. We're
awesome.
planning on premiering at the Dungeon Hobby Shop in Lake Geneva.
Oh, that's beautiful. All right. Well, if you've got the money, it'd definitely be worth it. I'm telling you, to play it at a table like that would be a time of a lifetime for sure.
Having filmed it, I can definitely attest to that. It is an experience. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell
Thank you for having me so much.
Yo,
I really
mean,
appreciate
like I
it.
said, I hate that we're such a small channel right now, but we're growing, and we're going to continue to grow. We're going to continue to promote people like yourself who are out there in this world telling amazing stories. For those that want to help out, of course, there's multiple ways you can do it. Come over to our Discord, hang out with us. Second thing, keep forgetting to say this. I said it a couple weeks ago, but this is a big thing. If you want to support the community of Dungeons & Dragons in a very positive way, all I need is one thing. A hashtag raise your glass. We're going to make this a thing because I believe it's true. Without one person, this is not going to work. But with everybody, we can make it work, and we can bring a positive aspect to the fantasy world that we're living in. Last but not least, we've talked a lot about mental health. There's an organization out there called Operation Tabletop who offer free games to people who have mental going through PTSD and things like that. Military veterans specifically, but anybody going through having issues with mental health. We're doing a fundraiser with them. None of the money goes back to us. It goes 100% to their cause. You can find that out on all of our socials. But this is the end of Tavern Talks. Raise your glasses high. This is Last Call. Thank you all for coming to join us. And hopefully we'll see you guys soon in a couple weeks. Keep an eye out, though, because we're going to be running some of our favorite episodes here on Tavern Talks for the next couple weeks is I'll be out of town for work. But then as we come back, we'll hopefully have a wonderful new guest, and we'll be able to continue our wonderful talks as we keep telling stories. Have a wonderful evening.